First and foremost, before we start the interview, I'd just like to say I appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule to come and have me ask you some questions, so just thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
So you started your foreign service career in 1980 and you ended in 2007.
Right.
So that's like at least 4 presidents that you served under. So my question is, as a representative abroad, how does it affect your ability to do your job effectively if your ideals don't align with the commander-in-chief in office at the time?
Mm-hmm. In some ways, I guess I was lucky because I never had to face that problem too directly. When I was in the Foreign Service, there was pretty much a consensus, whether you were Republican or whether you were Democrat, you understood that the relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union was a tricky one.
Right.
And my job, at least as I saw it, my job was to tell people in Washington what I thought about what was going on in the Soviet Union.
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't change whether I was talking to a Republican or whether I was talking to a Democrat. That is, the administration.
Right.
In other words, there was no Republican interpretation of events versus a Democratic interpretation of events.
Yes.
So I always found that it was not a conflict, given the part of the world that I was working in.
Right.
There were certainly some parts of the world where during that period of time there were disputes between administration policy and people who worked in the State Department. And
right.
Some people did feel called upon to resign.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, I was never really in that situation. And then it becomes a question of personal conscience,
mm-hmm.
what you do. But as long as I could always tell myself that I was giving Washington an honest appraisal of what was going on,
mm-hmm.
reporting events back to Washington accurately, and while I was working in Washington, as long as I felt that the policy that I was advocating was sound,
right.
then I was comfortable.
Okay. Yeah. So, as a representative abroad, well, obviously, you served during the Cold War in Liberia, Austria, and Russia, right?
Right.
So, as with the experience that comes from being a representative abroad like that,
mm-hmm.
What parallels, if any, can you see with the current state of foreign affairs between the U.S. and our foreign counterparts in modern times?
Well, I think the biggest single change today is that the consensus seems to be weakening in the United States with regard to what the U.S. presence abroad should be. There was a strong consensus back in the time I was in the State Department that U.S. leadership overseas was important to ensure stability, to ensure international stability.
Right.
That we had been through two major wars in the 20th century, where I think after those wars there was a strong consensus that had we been more involved in foreign affairs, had we been in more of a leadership position, we might have been in a better position to prevent those wars,
right.
And to keep us out of them and to keep other countries out of them.
Mm-hmm.
And after World War II, you saw that, I think, most vividly reflected in the creation of the United Nations.
Right.
And the creation of an organization like NATO. The idea being that you needed strong international cooperation with strong leadership in order to maintain stability.
Mm-hmm.
That consensus seems to be breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't say it's broken down. I'm not saying that. But you hear a lot of questioning of that now. And I think that's too bad. I think that's the single biggest weakness in many ways that we face right now.
Right.
If we're talking about foreign policy,
yeah.
we should never forget that while it may cost a little more money, and the quote-unquote benefits may not be always immediately obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Stability and peace in the world can't be taken for granted.
Right. So switching gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about your education.
Mm-hmm.
So after getting your degree in European history from Brown, right? You went on to earn a master's in Soviet studies. So my question is, what made you become so especially focused on the Soviet Union?
Right. Two things, I think, it would boil down to. One, ever since high school, I had a very strong interest in Russian literature. And I was reading novels like War and Peace, obviously in English, but I was reading them when I was in high school. I found Russian literature fascinating. And then when I got to college, there was a young professor at Brown who was just starting out, and he was really good, and his specialty was Russian history. And I think I really enjoyed taking his courses. I did seminars with him, and I think, you know, his influence is certainly very strong. So I'd say between you know, my own interest in the literature and running into a really good professor at Brown, I think that probably is what did it.
Okay. So I want to talk about some of your other interests as well, especially on the environmental side.
Sure.
So was it your work with the Audubon Society that really sparked your interest in environmental issues, or did you always have a leaning toward natural history and preserving, you know, the natural conditions of our planet?
Right. Well, I think it's really both. I mean, I always did have a leaning. There's no question about that. Ever since I was a kid, I've always just found the natural world to be fascinating. And the opportunity to work summers with the Audubon Society in their summer camp system was just a real opportunity, obviously, to build on that and develop it. And it was just great fun, you know, working with kids and, you know, introducing them to you know, the birds and the plants and different ideas. It was a great way to spend the summer. So between the two, you know, it's to this day, I'm still, it's one reason I think I live in Rappahannock County.
Right.
Because the attraction is so strong.
Right. Yeah. So before we wrap it up, I had one more question. To a young person who doesn't really know, you know, what they want to pursue professionally, what would be your best, you know, advice going forward?
My best advice would be to focus on what you're interested in. Focus on what you naturally enjoy. What you enjoy learning about, what you enjoy doing. When you go to college, take courses not just because you think you have to take the courses in order to meet a requirement, but take courses that you think you're going to enjoy, that you know, that you will, you know, actually enjoy picking up that book and reading about whatever it is, Russian history, biology, literature, whatever. I think once you get a genuine interest going in a field, then it can take off, and you can just have a lot of fun. And then working on it then doesn't seem nearly as painful. You know, you can really focus your energy. You'd be surprised how much energy you can gin up when you enjoy what you're doing.
Well, thank you again for your time and coming on.
Sure, my pleasure.
I appreciate it.